Welcome back to another exciting episode of Blazing Banter with your host, Fire Steve. Now, as you can tell, this episode looks a little bit differently already. I clearly don't have a guest. There's nobody on site with me here, and I'm not doing a video conference with anyone, and there's no one going to be here. So this episode is going to be less about banter, and it's going to be more about storytelling. Now, which story are we telling? Well, due to the recent events that have happened in the town of Jasper, Alberta, with 30% of the town being destroyed due to wildfire, it's brought out a lot of feelings. It's brought out a lot of emotions. A lot of people are going through a lot of things, and I'm no different. Now, I've never been to Jasper, full disclosure. I don't live there, so it hasn't affected me in that way. I don't have that personal connection, and I don't have that emotional connection as many people do. Many people have gone on trips there, or they've got went to a wedding there, or an anniversary, or celebrated some sort of milestone, taking a trip to that community. And unfortunately, that's not where my connection goes with it. Now, I look at it from the first responder, the firefighter lens of it, because the night that the town was being impinged by wildfire, I had messages and I had videos and I had photographs sent to me of what was happening in the town at that time. And it brought me back to 2019, being in Paddle Prairie when the Chuckegg Wildfire impacted the settlement of Paddle Prairie. And it's further led me to realize that this stuff's traumatic. I'm still unpacking what happened that night. And obviously, we're there to do a job. We do what we're trained to do, and we get it done. But it's the debrief, it's the aftermath of it. The kind of coming down afterwards. So that's the big reason why I wanted to do this. Because I know there's going to be a lot of firefighters that were there looking around and seeing nothing but chaos and inferno all around them, and it's very easy to get into the mindset of we didn't do enough. Why couldn't we do more? And as we're typically trained, it's like we do what we can, and unfortunately, not every outcome is absolutely a positive one. We do the best we can based on the tools and the time and the training we have. But it's very difficult not to take this stuff personally. It's very difficult to, a lot of people will just brush it off, and it's like, no, it's not that easy, and we do need to have that time to unpack it. So, first and foremost, I want, responders that were there, or, and not only Jasper, but also too, like people who were, in Fort Mcmurray in 2016, in Slave Lake in 2011, and, a multitude of other communities, Lytton, BC, anybody who's been in these instances, I want to let you know that you're not alone. Your feelings, the way you feel, the flashbacks, the memories, you're not alone in that. There's other people that feel very similarly. And, hopefully people who have gone through this have taken the time to go out and, talk to somebody about it. And, I'll be honest, I definitely have not. I was able to start unpacking some of this back in April when I went to talk to like a mental health specialist. It's a program that our fire department offers. We got a check in with a psychologist a few times a year, and I decided to take advantage of it. So I started working through it, but I know there's more to do. And that's kind of the second thing is, for me to put this story out here and put this message out here, I think it'll help me, and I hope it helps. It'll help me kind of work on this and reflect on it and just kind of put it out there. And, like I said, A, let people know that they're not alone, and B, for my own sake, just try to get it out there, and maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. I guess we'll see. So on that note, for everyone tuning into the podcast, appreciate having you here. If this is your first episode, welcome in. If you've been listening to some of the other episodes, welcome back. The big thing, I was always, giving this video a like, or if you're listening to the audio, giving it a like, engaging, leaving comments, and also subscribing, hitting that notification bell when a new episode is dropped. Lets you know when we post another episode. But also all this interaction helps boost the podcast, especially being a newer podcast. Any engagement, interaction is greatly appreciated. We have the video feed on YouTube, so you can see my smiling face there. Or if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, we're available on basically almost every major podcast directory. So appreciate having you there and the support. But let's get into the story. So we're gonna go back to the beginning. Well, we're not going to go all the way back to the beginning because then we're going to be here a while. This isn't a full autobiography. But we're going to go back to May of 2019. So in May 2019 is when the Chuckegg fire first started. Now, at the time, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to all the wildfires. This is years before I got on social media. So, I mean, if it was directly impacting my work area, I'd pay attention to it. So at that time, I was working as a contract oil field plant and field operator in the Rainbow Lake area. Now, for those that don't know where Rainbow Lake is, if you're not from Alberta, or even if you're from Alberta, but you don't know like the far north, Rainbow Lake is an end of the road community. It is like pretty much it's probably like 30 minutes off the BC border, the Alberta BC border, and it's about 3.5 hours south of the Northwest Territory border. I mean, if you could go directly across, it's like a 300 kilometers south. Anyway, so Rainbow Lake is directly west of high level, and this is where I worked for 5.5 years. Yeah, basically from 2016 till early 2022, I worked in this area. So I was typically working a 2-week in, 2-week out shift. Now, this shift specifically, we had some pipeline integrity stuff to deal with. We had a composite pipeline. It wasn't looking quite right. So we had some specialists come out, or basically people that were experienced in that type of piping material, that were going to come out. We're going to have a look at it. Ultimately, what we ended up doing is extracting a sample of it, and then we had to send it off for analysis because we didn't want to have any sort of pipeline issues and lead to an environmental disaster. So I remember I stayed in longer. I should have went home on the Wednesday, Thursday, and I ended up staying in all the way till Sunday. We did the work on the Friday, Saturday, did our excavation, cut out the piece that we were going to send off. And our ops manager, aka Dad, my dad was up as well to assist with this. So he flew up, but then he's like, well, I don't know how I'm going to get back to Calgary. And I'm like, well, once this thing's extracted, I'm like, I've got no point to stick around. We got coverage at the plant. So, I'll drive you and the sample back to Calgary. So this was Sunday morning. Now, I remember I wrapped up doing what I was doing Saturday night. I remember leaving Rainbow Lake and traveling east towards high level. And I do remember driving through the smoke. I remember about 30, maybe 40K outside of high level to the west of it. I remember driving along, and it was just, you went from being able like good visibility, and I was driving like later on in the day, to just like really, really smoky conditions. Not extreme, like you could still, like, it wasn't like dangerous to drive through, but you still had to slow down, you still had to pay attention. So I remember going through that, and you're breathing that smoky smell of the burning timber. So then I carried on, met up with Dad there in high level. He had a room at the Super 8. So then got in there, had a sleep, and we're getting ready to hit the road in the morning. So long day ahead. I was going to drive all the way from high level to Calgary and then back up to Lac La Biche. So I was already in for like about a 15-hour day. Probably. I think it was 15 hours by the time I was all said and done. So woke up in the morning, and I remember going down. They had the continental breakfast, and we were went down having a snack, and watching the news. Well, because they had the news playing, but at the same time too, you look out the window and you can see the smoke plume off to the southwest of high level. So see this, and then it was actually, I think, I can't remember if it was on the news or not. I feel like they did talk about, well, there's a wildfire, in the area getting close. And we're just sitting there, eating our breakfast. Oh yeah, that doesn't look good at all. And there was somebody there who was from the U.S. I forget exactly which state they were from, but they were up doing some bear hunting. Like they were with some bear outfitters that they were out. They're like, well, hopefully we can do our hunt still. Hopefully this fire doesn't impact it too badly. So that was kind of the conversation that went there. We got on the road, traveled south, and we took Highway 88. We didn't go through Manning. And then, made the trip and didn't think too much of it at that point in time. As far as the fire was concerned, I was focused on, hey, I got to get all the way down to Calgary. Got down there about supper time and then worked my way back home. And I think I got home at about 1, 2 in the morning. So, like, this was Sunday. So I got home about like 1 or 2 a.m. on the Monday. So this would be like the holiday Monday on Victoria Day of the long weekend. That's when all this happened. And I remember turning on the news that morning. I can't remember. I woke up and that's when the evacuation order was issued for high level. Was it on the Monday or the Tuesday? I can't remember. Keep in mind, this is 5 years ago. So I'll do the best I can to remember. I feel like it was the next day though. I remember waking up and watching the news and they're like, yeah, we're making the decision to evacuate the town of High Level due to this wildfire. And then the first thought I had in my head is like, well, I'm going to get a hold of my fire chief because, prior to we had crews that went up to Fort McMurray in 2016. We sent crews to Williams Lake in 2017. And then multiple other wildfire deployments. Actually before then, I'm thinking we've been on multiple deployments since then, but 2017 was a big one. I don't think there was too much in 2018. So then, 2019, I'm like, I don't know if we're sending anybody up there to do, help with the structure protection and the wildfire aspect or the WUI, Wildland Urban Interface aspect of it. So I remember getting a hold of my chief and I'm like, are we sending a crew? And he's like, yep, I'm pulling it together right now. I said, okay, I want to go. He's like, okay, I'll let you know. Because for me, it was, I know in 2017, I had been asked, but at that point, I'm like, we had lots of members that were able to go, and I had work duties myself. Like I couldn't just escape from the responsibilities of that, especially with the kind of the commitments they were looking for at that point in time. So I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna go then. But for the Chuckegg, I was okay. This one impacts me because I spent a lot of time in High Level. Because Rainbow Lake's a small, tiny little town. For those that know, how small Rainbow is. For those that don't know, you're looking at a town of at that time was maybe 700 people, maybe, and it's been going down since then. But it's mostly an oil field town, so a lot of people kind of in and out, and things have been slowing down in the area. So there's not a lot there. So High Level's where you would do the bulkier grocery shopping. That's where you would go for. They had a Tim Hortons. Sometimes you just wanted to kind of get away from work for a day. So then I was like, okay, well, with the whole thing, I spent lots of time at High Level, and also too, it's just the possibility that if that fire took a run to the west, that hey, I might not have work. So it's like, hey, well, I'm available, and I feel personally vested into this. So I immediately put my hand up to go on this one for sure. Now, I didn't go on the first deployment because I think they mobilized a crew up, I think for the Tuesday, because the evacuation happened on the Monday, and then they mobilized crews to head up there and start setting up for structure protection teams, sprinkler trailers, that sort of thing. They were getting all that mobilized, and I think on the Tuesday or Wednesday, people were starting to already arrive up there. So our first crew went up on the, I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, they mobilized, they went up. I wasn't on the first crew. And then they were there until Sunday. Because they were like, okay, well, we're going to do I think it was like 4 or 5 day revolutions. Like, I know when we sent crews up to Fort Mac, they were typically 2 days, like 48 hours, but that's because it was like active firefighting and busy. So it was like keep rotating people through. So for the Chuckegg, because it was close enough, but still it was, I mean, still from Lac La Biche to High Level, it was still a 7 hour drive. So it wasn't like, it wasn't just next door. So they went up, they started setting up, getting stuff ready up there. And then, yeah, I was mobilizing up on the Sunday. So with how that all played out, because I did work extra, I was only supposed to be off like a week and a half. So typically I did a 2 week shift, and it was like travel up on a Tuesday, leave on a Thursday. So keep in mind, like I said, we're already halfway into my first week of days off. They deployed up on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and then and then it's like, okay, well, get ready for Sunday. I'm like, well, I can't go up for a long period of time because I said, well, I got to go back to work on the Wednesday. And that was the other thing as well. I'm like, well, I guess what I could do is I'll just bring my work truck up. So then I would be up there ready to go. So it was a thing of I didn't have to, I didn't travel with the crew. Like, we had a crew truck that was exchanging people out. I was like, well, I'll take my own vehicle because I need to go up there anyway. So I got myself all ready to go. There was initial crew of 2 was sent up, and then we were going as a crew of 3 because for myself of, the uncertainty of like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to be here for the full time. So like, well, we'll send you as an extra, but I was actually sent as like the crew boss for that apparatus. And then one of the other members was like, okay, well, if I step away, then he'll take over. And that was the deal there. So yeah, traveled up to, got myself ready to not only go back for my work shift, but also got ready for this deployment because I was going up a few days earlier. So, because I mean, typically I would have been traveling up. So went up on the Sunday, and then the plan was, okay, well, I'll work Monday, Tuesday, and then I talked to my coworkers. I'm like, okay, well, I'll be in the area. I said, so like, instead of traveling up on the Tuesday, I'll just do my work duties for the structure stuff for the wildfire deployment on the Wednesday, and then once I'm wrapped up for the day, I'll just scoot over and be back in Rainbow. So that was our original plan going forward. So I went up and actually ended up having to take the back roads. I remember that because I went and picked up my groceries and everything that I needed. Obviously, I had to pick it up in Slave Lake because everything in High Level was closed down. So when I got up there, I got up there earlier, and then I was like, okay, well, I couldn't go through High Level like the typical way to get to Rainbow Lake. So they had me take the detour, which for those that know that detour, so I had to go north of High Level, get up towards Zama, old Zama City, take the Zama road, and then I had to take the cut across. So there was a road that would take you from Zama down to Chate, which is the Dene First Nation community, and then it would bring you back to the Highway 58, and then you would bounce over to Rainbow Lake from there. Luckily, I didn't have to go all the way to Rainbow because our plant site was close to Chate. So then brought my groceries, dropped them off, said, okay, well, I'll see you guys in a few days, and turned and burned back. Had to take the scenic route again. So I didn't get into High Level till later in the evening. The other 2 had already done a handover with our outgoing crew, so they were already on the road out. I kind of got the clip notes, kind of got myself checked in with whoever I needed to there, kind of get set up for room and just letting them know that, hey, we're here, ready to go to work. Because I need to keep an accurate head count on everyone. Usually, like, you're checking in with the Incident Command Post, or ICP, not the Insane Clown Posse, Incident Command Post. So you're checking in, they know, okay, yeah, we got 2 people, 3 people, and then we've got this apparatus that's ready to go. So, yeah, checked in, kind of did a couple hours worth of work, I guess. I mean, we got in, got orientated, told kind of what was going on. And then we wrapped up. I think we were working 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. We were working 12-hour shifts. So 9 p.m. Okay, cool. That's it for the day. Went and got my room, got all checked in, had to sleep, was ready to go to work Monday morning. Now, at this point, the vast majority of these sprinkler protection systems had already been set up. Like, a lot of the work had already been done prior to us arriving, because usually that's what will happen. The first deployed crew to an area will get everything initially set up. They'll come in and, they'll do their assessments, and then they can kind of figure out, okay, well, is there more to do? But they're going to kind of, set up sprinkler protection on the primary key things and just kind of work off of there. So we, the vast majority had already been done. At this time, too, they had already done a controlled ignition or a back burn or a prescribed burn, which is prescribed burn is the more, the proper term, I guess, because anytime you're playing with fire, controlled burn is also another thing that people have called it. But the problem with it is that as much as we like to think we're in control, fire is a force of nature. It has a mind of its own. It's going to do whatever it's going to do. So yeah, they did a prescribed burn, which successfully backburned a lot of the fuel away from the town of High Level. Like, there was a lot of fuel between High Level and where the fire was burning. So they were able to successfully clear out that fuel, which actually aided in defending that town drastically. So this had already been conducted. So we were there, and it's like, okay, today we're just pretty much, we're going to test some systems. There's a few areas where we can maybe, enhance the systems that are already there, or basically improve them. So got paired up with our task force. And I think, who were we with? Yeah, we had, the engine out of Canuso. And shout out to Dustin. For me and Dustin met, and we became friends after that. So yeah, we had Canuso's engine. Well, actually, no, it wasn't, Big Lakes County. It was a Nilda's engine. But, and actually, it was like a bunch, Dustin's from Canuso. Anyway. We were paired up with them and Wetaskiwin's tender. So a big thing we were kind of going through is, okay, we're going to do some fire smarting around some of the homes in the community. We also did some runs, so basically just training runs. So for those that aren't aware, when these deployments happen, when these incidents happen and resources get deployed, sometimes there's some time where, you get the prep done and everything's set up, but the fire's still a little ways away. So you're prepared for that fire to, basically take a run at the town, or that's essentially what you're there to do. You're there just in case it does. And, usually in that instance, there's a good likelihood that it could very well happen. So there's a lot of times there where you're going to be doing, testing systems, and it's like, hey, what else can we do? What else can we do to increase the survivability of some of these homes in the area? And we'll just go around and do a little bit of fire smarting. And also, too, you'll do some practice runs, because it's like, hey, you're just working with these people for the first time. So does everybody know what their roles are when it comes down to it? So you're going to kind of just go through and, okay, we're going to go down this back alley and then pretend, okay, the fire's here. Spray some water. Sometimes you actually do it. Sometimes you just pretend to do it. It's just, going in and just kind of doing some practice revolutions in case something should happen. So that was pretty much the first day. First day was just, testing systems, doing that sort of thing. Day 2, things were looking up. Things were really looking up for the town of High Level and surrounding area. So, at that point, they're like, okay, well, actually, we're going to look at taking down some systems. Like, we feel pretty confident that, we've eliminated that fuel between town. The fire behavior is kind of subsiding. Forestry seems to be getting a handle on it. So we're going to start demobbing some of this stuff, taking down sprinklers off some of the homes and some of the properties and wrapping up hose and that sort of thing. Because, the goal is to get people back to their lives, back to their homes, back to life in general as quickly as possible, because, people have been displaced, everything's on hold because you're sitting in a hotel elsewhere or an evacuation center. And the quicker we can get people back to their homes, the better it is. So that was the focus. That was the goal. Hey, let's get people back to town. So, and then in order to do that, we need to, make things conducive for that. Like, basically, clean things up so that way, hey, people aren't tripping over hoses and, there's sprinklers mounted to their ceiling or roofs and whatnot. So that was day 2. A big part of it was, things were looking up. And then Wednesday happened. Now, you think I would have been a little bit more prepared because I could remember dates and all that. I think it was the 28th. I could have sworn it was the 28th. I'll fact check that afterwards here. So Wednesday, I remember talking. I'm like, talking to my cross shift. He basically that morning, he's like, "Yeah, I'm just kind of getting things wrapped up." I'm like, "Yeah, things were kind of, on the downturn here yesterday." I'm like, I should be able to take the main highway. Hopefully, I was hoping that I would be able to take the main highway to Rainbow Lake. So kind of what my plan was. I'm like, well, I'll work half the day because things were just kind of, like I said, from the day before, things were kind of on that downtrend. Now, usually, yeah, like I said, we were meeting at the fire hall for like 9:30. Usually, we'd have our morning briefing at the high level fire hall at 9:30 in the morning. So on the Wednesday, which was the day the Battle of Paddle essentially happened, I remember, we're getting up and then, we'd typically grab a coffee or, they usually had that stuff at the fire hall too, but we'd drive around a little bit. And I remember at 9 in the morning, because we had our radios. Well, we had AFRAX radios that were given to us by the province. Like they had a provincial trailer, basically had this big setup with a tower and a full bank of like radios for all the responders there. Because at that point, we were still using the old regular analog radios with our department before we made the switch here. But anyway, 9 in the morning, they're like, we need, we're looking for, where's Laklabish? Like, where's this unit? And we're like, okay, this is odd. Okay, well, we report to the hall. And I remember as soon as we walked in, went and checked in. I'm like, hey, you guys were trying to get a hold of us. They're like, yep, we're actually switching you off. We're going to take you from this, like the task force we were part of, and we're going to deploy you to this other task force here. So, we went from having the Big Lakes County engine and Wetaskiwin tender, we went to a task force that was comprised of a tender from Slave Lake and an engine from High Level. So that was our new task force. They're like, okay, well, we're going to send you guys south on south of High Level, and you guys are going to assist forestry, watching for hotspots, because at this point, forestry was going to do, and once again, there was going to be another prescribed burn to eliminate some of the fuel between the highway and the main part of the fire. Now, at this point, this is where Unified Command they had basically dissolved the Unified Command. So up to this point, effectively, the town of High Level and Mackenzie County, along with forestry, were basically they were working in unison. They were sitting in the same room, making decisions together. As soon as you dissolve Unified Command, it becomes a thing of, okay, forestry has their operation, and then the structure protection branch and the municipality stuff is all on their own. So everything's kind of separated. So communication, I think, was lacking. Well, I mean, there was a breakdown in communication because they're not sitting in the same room anymore. So, immediately we're like, yeah, pack a lunch. You guys are heading south here. Okay, grab our stuff. Typically, the days before we're kind of, we were busy doing stuff, but it wasn't like crazy busy. So we packed our lunches and we went with our task force south between Paddle Prairie and High Level. So I remember watching, we were there, drip torches were out, starting the tree line on fire to eliminate that fuel. And our thing was they're just like, hey, just do patrols, like ensure that, the fire we don't get spot fires across the highway. And we're like, hey, no, perfectly fine. So we kept doing our thing. We kind of, we're patrolling a certain section there. And then I don't know if the wind shifted. And this is the part I can't remember. I'm pretty sure we had wind pick up. Like the conditions changed rapidly to the point of, because it was a fairly calm morning, and then that wind started picking up. And then it started throwing embers across the highway. So then we started having spot fires to deal with. So then it's like, hey, putting this spot out. And this part, like I said, this is where my memory gets a little bit fuzzy, because everything happened really, really fast. Like, I remember we were sitting there kind of waiting, and then all of a sudden, yeah, there's spot fires. So, okay, we're going to put this out. The engine, I know they were dealing with stuff. And I think at one point, like I said, the wind picked up so bad, they actually seen like a fire NATO, like a little dust devil, but with fire. I didn't see it because we were up the road a little ways, because all we were rolling around with was a brush truck, or like a smaller engine, also known as a Type 6 engine for those that know fire speak. So we were effectively in a Dodge 1-ton with a water tank and a pump in the back. So that was our apparatus. So very mobile, not a lot of water. So we were, putting out spots and trying to knock down, and then I remember looking out into the tree line, and I could see spruce trees torching. And it got to the point where we're like, yeah, we're done. Like, there's nothing we can do. Like, this fire is running across the highway. So we moved south. So we went further south. And I remember with our task force, we kind of regrouped and we're like, okay, well, what now? What's our next kind of mission here? Because I think at this point now we're kind of cut off, because, everything was kind of burning north of us. Now, I remember talking, we ended up at this like little pull-out area, staging area, where forestry had a bunch of equipment. I remember, the one guy's like, we ran into somebody looking for somebody who was kind of in charge of that area. We're like, okay, the fire across the highway. And the one guy was kind of like, it did what? And we're like, across the highway. And then he just kind of wandered off. And we're like, okay, is he telling somebody? Because we weren't sure what was going on at that point. Like, we didn't know if this was part of the plan. We don't know if this is what was supposed to happen. And ultimately, I don't think it was what was supposed to happen. Now, that main head of the fire started pushing hard down towards us too. So I think, like I said, the wind conditions changed rapidly. So we moved our way south, and we were just kind of working our way through and say, okay, well, we end up down around Paddle Prairie, and we say, okay, there's some structures here. Okay, let's maybe, we did some triage. We went around, we basically like, okay, what would these homes need to protect them in the event of this fire making a run down here? Keep in mind, at this point, we had no sprinkler protection equipment with us on hand. We were just basically, fire engine, tender, and a brush truck or a Type 6 engine. So we were just kind of doing some initial triage. Hey, Kate, where do we got water sources? What do we need? What's the outlook? Can we do some fire smarting? So as we're kind of going through, we were then later joined with some other equipment. So they basically sent some SPU trailers out of the north. I imagine there was some accessibility at that point, because they were able to come from high level down to us in that paddle area. So we were on the northmost properties on the settlement. And so we're going through, and we worked on these properties. We had our group div soup leader come in, and they did an aerial flyover, basically being like, hey, well, here's what we need to protect. Here's what we have for equipment. So we started coming up with a game plan, and we got to work. So we were joined with another 1 or 2 task forces. No, we had a few. I mean, we ended up, by the end of it, we had quite a bit of, not a huge amount of equipment. I think in total there was 24 or 25 of us there that night, as far as personnel. As far as equipment, yeah, I think we were 2 or 3 task forces, or we were 2 and a couple like SPUs and whatnot. So yeah, we got to work setting up sprinkler protection, getting everything kind of geared up for the inevitability that this fire was going to take a run south. And I remember by about 2 in the afternoon. Now, keep in mind, we're going to go back to, I was supposed to be leaving this day. I was supposed to be wrapping up and heading back to Rainbow Lake to go to work, to go operating. And I remember I told my cross shift, I'm like, oh, I should be there, yeah, later on. And I got to the point where I'm like, I had to find, eventually where I was able to get a little bit of cell service. I phoned them up, and I'm like, I'm not going to be coming in today. Like, I said, I can't say, I don't know specifically when I'm going to be there, but I don't think I'm going to be there till like way later. He's like, well, everything's running fine, the plant's good. And we had other operators in the area. It wasn't like we were leaving things completely high and dry. We had other people in the area. It just, makes for a big run for them to take care of, their stuff and my stuff. But I still had the conversation. I told them, I'm like, maybe let Joe know that I'm not going to be making it in till later. I will phone as soon as I can. And that's kind of where we went from there. So we yeah, we got to work, did some fire smart, set up sprinkler protection. We did what we could to, make these homes protected for this fire. So I'm trying to think. Yeah. So then after that, it was getting a little bit later in the day. I want to say like 3, 4 in the afternoon. And this is like high intensity. You can just see that plume, like that marshmallowy, billowy cloud. You can just see like the fire behavior had picked up considerably. And this thing was pushing south, but also pushing to the southeast, because at the same time. I can't remember exactly what time of the day. Actually, no. Yeah, at the same time, this fire had taken a run towards the Peace River. Now, Peace River is a pretty big river, especially around that high level area. This fire spotted across that river. So now we also had, things to contend with on the other side, kind of in that like Crete area. I think it was Blue Hills. Like there was Carcajou, Blue Hills area. Like there was fire spotting over there. So there was resources going from high level all the way around to the other side. So we were basically, fighting the fire on multiple fronts and doing multiple things. So I know they had crews over there, but we had our thing to deal with in Paddle Prairie. Now I know I didn't initially share the video. Now, the initial video was actually part of that was recorded by Jared, who was part of our crew. So part of like the truck that I was a part of. He had a GoPro, and he was like, "Yeah, I grabbing footage as we're kind of going along." Ultimately, he did share this one video to some people out of high level that made a documentary on the Chuckegg. So actually, this video was part of this documentary, and actually, this video was part of. If anybody takes the provincial Wildland Urban Interface training, so there's a provincial course that actually certifies you to do like WUI events. So when these communities are threatened, they want people who have been adequately trained. Obviously, 2023. Let's go back to last year. We were pulling people who's had fire experience because, to say, well, we need people with this specific course. There wouldn't have been enough people to do what needed to be done. So anyway, they have this course out that is basically ensuring that people have the proper skills, knowledge, know-how, so that way they're effective on these deployments. Now, this video is also part of that course. So, what is the video? So we were having issues with some of our pumps. Like we had there's these Mark III pumps, which are a 2-stroke engine. So the 2-stroke pump, they run off mixed fuel. Sometimes what happens though, and unfortunately, I think everybody's done it at some point in time, you'll add too much or too little, typically too much oil to the gasoline. And then what this will do is, if you go too light on the oil mix, you can you can burn out an engine because it doesn't have enough lubrication, because it doesn't actually have oil. There's no oil reservoir. It just uses lubrication from what's burned off in the gasoline. But if you go with too much oil, it will foul up your spark plugs. It'll, it either won't run right or it won't run at all. So there was some gasoline, I think that was mixed too rich, or that's what it appeared to be. We're having issues with these pumps anyway. So we swapped out one Mark for another. Still, it ran for a little while, and then it went down again. So then the decision was made, okay, well, we have a 4-stroke gasoline pump. We have this BB4. Let's swap out the Mark for a BB, and then that way we're not going to have this issue. Because at this point, like, that fire was like within, kilometers of the most northern property on the settlement. So we went in there and we had minutes to. We were basically told, like, you guys got 3 minutes to swap this thing out. If it's not done, we're just dropping and we're leaving, because ultimately safety is paramount. Safety is a priority on these events. We're not going to put people, we're doing a risky job, but we're not just going to put people in harm's way just for the sake of putting people in harm's way. but we'll definitely, push it to the limit to do what we can. But we're also not going to just stick people in front of this, very intense wildfire that, would have overrun us. So, you have time frames, you have periods, trigger points that basically, okay, this is it, we're done. Because that fire generates so much heat that that's when people lose their lives. So, and life safety is most paramount. So we went in, and it was like clockwork. It was like a NASA, or not NASA. It was like a NASCAR pit crew. We went in, we swapped out this pump, and the adrenaline rush there. Like, as I remember looking up and just seeing like this big plume, just this big, like, massive wall of smoke coming at us, and it's like, this is wild. And keep in mind, I'm lead on our crew. And so for me, like, I'm in charge of everybody in my truck safety. Obviously I've got a task force lead and a group of div soup looking out for me, but at the same time too, I've got to look out for my people. And I remember we rolled up and I told the guys, because there was 3 of us, I'm like, hey, one person does fuel, one person does suction, one person does discharge. We'll all pack the pump over together. Everyone gets to work on their individual component, and we'll just do that. And it worked out really well. Actually, we had a 4th. Matt helped us from GP, and that helped it go a little bit quicker, but we were pretty much prepared to do it either way. But this gave us enough time to get in there, get it done, get trucks turned around, load up the old equipment, pump and 2-stroke fuel. And we had the 4-stroke pump laid down, boom, done. We had that pump swapped out and fired back up within, I would say, 2.5 minutes. And I've posted that video before on my own socials. Over on TikTok, and years ago shared it on Facebook before I had like any public social media. So, but it was already publicly released in the documentary, and then it's also part of a course. So that was intense. That wasn't even the most intense part of this whole experience. We did that, and then all the other systems seems to be working fine. So we had the sprinkler. We were basically firing up the system so that way, as this fire front hit in, those structures were going to be protected, or as protected as they could be with the time and the resources we had. So we regrouped. We got down to, I forget the highway. There's basically a highway that will bring you to a ferry that will cross you over to Lacrete. So from like Paddle Prairie, it'll bring you over to basically Lacrete, taking the back way. So we met up there, and we didn't have any more pumps. We didn't have any more equipment. So we're like, okay, well, we're going to regroup in Paddle Prairie and figure out where we're going from there, what we're going to do. So I also know that there was a bunch of properties along that highway that we did not look at all. We didn't go down that road whatsoever. Now, I know some of the structures survived. I know there was some lost, but it was pretty much one of those things. Well, we didn't have any equipment to deal with that at that point in time, and that fire was moving. Like, from where we started that morning to where Paddle Prairie was, I think we were like a 30 or 40 kilometer stretch away. Now, I know forestry, like, they had aerial, like they were doing tanker drops. I think there's one home that actually they hit with retardant, which typically when your air tankers are going by and they're dropping retardant, they're not supposed to drop on homes or any buildings, but in this one instance they did, and I don't know if it helped. Well, it definitely helped because the structure was still standing. I don't know if it required it. We did have sprinkler protection set up on it, but guaranteed it did help somewhat. So we regrouped in Paddle Prairie. So forestry had a bunch of stuff set up there. There was choppers, and they had like a big semi truck, a Super B with like jet fuel, parked at the gas station. And at this point, the residents of Paddle Prairie there wasn't an actual evacuation order, I don't think. A lot of them had been put out on notice, I think. And then I think as the day went on, then the order actually came out. But a lot had evacuated thinking that it had to, just because, there's a lot of elderly and there was people with like breathing conditions or breathing issues or health issues that the wildfire smoke would have really been detrimental. So there's a lot of people that left thinking that we don't need to evacuate because we're under threat. We just need to evacuate because we can't breathe. So, and that was another part of the thing that we were tasked to do, is make sure, hey, is there any people, or who's all left here? And fortunately, like I said, it seemed like everybody had been gone by the time we got around there. So anyway, we're in Paddle Prairie. And yeah, so there's not a whole lot of people in the community. They must have had some sort of event or something like that, because I know like there was lots of food that they had at their community plex, Paddle Prairie community plex. So we got there, and it was a thing of that's because I'm trying to think. We were regrouping, and we're like, okay, well, we're gonna be here, and we can't make it north. We can't go back to high level. Okay, what do we do now? Well, I guess we could drive all the way around, but they're like, well, we need somebody here to, defend the community if this fire moves as fast. I mean, because typically with fire behavior, it's going to be you're going to have intense fire behavior during the day, especially later afternoon into your evening, and then as nightfall hits, temperatures come down, humidities go up, your fire behavior will lessen, and it won't be as intense. So usually, like, the fires won't take this huge run. They'll be, these fires will be moving, and then they'll kind of calm down overnight, and then they'll pick up again in the day, and that's the cycle. That wasn't the cycle on this one, but that's a little bit of foreshadowing. So yeah, we were regrouping, and there was at one point, well, what do we need for supplies? Well, everybody figure out what you need. Like, do we need tents? Do we need, supplies? Like, what do we need? And they were basically putting an order together. Okay, we're going to load up all this stuff in a chopper at high level, and they're going to fly it out to you. That was the original plan. The plume was so large from this fire that the chopper wouldn't have been able to make its way around, drop off our supplies, and return. Keep in mind, this is at about 6 or 7 o'clock at night. At about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, we had our div soup fly out in a chopper, do aerial reconnaissance, and land where we were, just north of where we were at. So the conditions changed considerably between that, 1 to 2 p.m. till around supper time. Things got really intense really quick. So then I remember we went into, there was the, what was the name of that store? Anyway, there was a little, there was a convenience store just off the highway in Paddle Prairie. And there was all of us, so we just went in there. Okay, well, let's go buy some food then. I've worked in the oil field for years and years and years. My dad took me out to freaking gas plants and compressor stations when I was, 12 years old, 13 years old. Remember him stocking up, hey, we'll grab some pepperoni sticks, we'll grab this. And then also too with me running power tongs, I spent lots of times living in my truck for days, if not a week at a time. So I got really good at knowing, okay, I can operate with minimal stuff, but hey, we have the opportunity to get supplies. What am I buying? Because I think a lot of people are going in, okay, they're going to buy themselves a bag of chips and a sandwich and a drink. And I'm like, no. I'm buying a bag of beef jerky. I'm buying pepperoni sticks. I'm buying trail mix. I also bought a sandwich and stuff. I bought stuff to eat in the moment, but I also bought stuff knowing that if we're stuck in this truck for the next 2 days, we're going to have something. So, I spent $80, I think, myself. I think I bought a phone charger too. But I'm curious, like I said, the amount of the time of money that or the amount of business that store seen in such a short period of time. That store probably seen more business in that 20 minutes we were there than they did the whole 3 days before, maybe even a week before. Because you had 20 some firefighters just buying stuff. So, and then we had people who were very, very helpful in Paddle Prairie. They're like, hey, you guys need fuel? Come to the town or the community shop. They had a public workshop. So we were able to get fuel for our vehicles there. Kind of got a bit of a lay of the land, and they're like, yeah, we have our community center. And they're like, you guys are welcome to stay in the gym. So that is what ended up happening. The original idea was we're going to get a bunch of tents and whatever brought out to us. So yeah, we stocked up, kind of all regrouped at the community center, and that pretty well did it for our day there. And then I know we had a kind of a debrief, at that night as everyone was kind of settling in. So everybody got back, and we kind of, there wasn't much we could do at that point in time because we didn't have the pumps, so we couldn't set up on any other properties outside of the community. So it's just like, well, we're gonna see what this thing does. We didn't anticipate that thing to run how it did that night, though. So we were going to be running. We're going to cycle through personnel to do night watch. That was the conversation. We're going to have people working shifts. And we had different trucks that were going to work at different times. So that way everybody was able to get some sleep, but at the same time too, we were able to kind of have somebody to watch for that trigger point. So I think our shift was supposed to be like one of the last ones. I think we were supposed to be like the 4 to 5 a.m. or 5 to 6 a.m. I can't remember what we were tasked with. I just remember we didn't make it that far. So we were told like, hey, you guys are going to be on from this time to this time, and then everybody knew what their deal was. And then at that point, kind of talked about what happened, what we're up against here. So we did a debrief, and then afterwards, everybody kind of making phone calls to their families, and just kind of unwinding a little bit after that busy day. So then I know they wanted everybody. They're like, okay, well, we want everybody inside the community center, like inside, like, for lack of a better term, like the hall. Actually, I was gonna say gym, but inside the hall. But I had done years and years of working on the rigs, and lots of time sleeping in my truck. So for me, I'm like, well, if I try to sleep on this gym mat, I'm probably not going to have a very good sleep. We have, it'd be different if we were trying to sleep in a fire truck, but I'm like, we're sleeping in a pickup. I can kick the seat back, we can relax. So I remember talking to our div soup, and I'm like, hey, would it be okay if we slept in the truck? And he's like, no, I'm perfectly fine. He's like, I just want to know where you're at. He's like, as long as you're parked and people can find you and everybody knows where you're at, that's all I'm concerned with. Okay, cool. So yeah, we were napping in the truck. Had a nap, finally passed out. And I think it was like maybe 11:30 by the time I fell asleep. Because keep in mind, far north, days are longer. So it didn't really get dark out till like 10:30. I want to say. It's random A, yeah. But I remember after the sunset, you could see off in the distance. Not so much to the north, but you could see across the river. Like kind of in that direction, you can see like just that orange glow of the fire where it had crossed the river kind of on the other side. And that was eerie enough as in itself. So then, yeah, anyway, crashed out. And I remember, the good old, you guys probably can't hear that because I'm using the mic. Anyway, 1 a.m, fucking bang, 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 bang. Knock, 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 knock. Okay, yeah, time to get up. It's time to go. Huh? It's go time. And you're kind of like stupor, huh? And then they're like, yep, we got to get moving. We got to start setting up because that fire's taking a run down here. So we didn't anticipate this fire. I mean, just they didn't anticipate it to hit the actual main part of the community until like morning, maybe even early afternoon. At 1 a.m, they basically observed, like just based on the fire behavior, that this fire wasn't slowing down, even given the nighttime conditions. So we started setting up. So got up, and because we didn't have any pumps, but we were able to still set up sprinklers and stuff of the like on some of the critical infrastructure in the community. Now, those that are experienced and know this, understand structure protection would know this. To everyone else who doesn't know, we typically won't run off a municipal system unless we absolutely have to, because we have no guarantee that the power is going to stay on for your hydrants or any of that. So we like to run off, pumps that we can maintain ourselves, because that's, you just have a guarantee that your system's going to stay online and not go down when you need it. So typically we won't tie into, faucets on the outside of a home or hydrants of that nature, but desperate times. So at this point, we tied everything into hydrants because they did have a working municipal system. So yeah, we got everything set up on some of the critical infrastructure. So their community center, the school, the utility shop, because they had like some fuel tanks and stuff of that nature that we protected. So just certain key things that a community needs. And unfortunately, I know it sounds harsh, but I think the big thing is, well, you should care about everything. It's like we absolutely do, but you have to triage it. You have to prioritize what is super important. And a home is very important. It's very important to an individual, and I don't discount that in any way, shape, or form. But when you look at it from a community perspective, is this community, what's going to ensure that this community is going to come back? You protect that critical infrastructure, more homes can be built. Whereas if you lose that critical infrastructure and that home is okay, well, if you don't have a water treatment plant anymore, if you don't have if there's no school there, if there's nothing left, that's when, eventually gets to that point where it's like, well, we don't know if we're going to rebuild. Even if you have a home there, maybe it'll be a thing of like, well, now they're not bringing any of the services back. But anyway, I digress. We prioritized on the critical infrastructure, and we prepared ourselves to do bump and goes and basically just do or hold and protect. And the main difference there is basically the same thing of like we were setting up in order to, as this fire was pushing south. And imagine, like I said, the forest is burning towards this community, and there's homes on the outskirts, and there's homes down the middle, and wherever. There's lots of property there. So we were getting ourselves ready. Okay, well, we're gonna have to put out this fire as it's coming through different places. The one saving grace for Paddle Prairie, and I think about this every time I've driven by there. There was a huge pasture. Like you're in the boreal forest, but also too, you start getting into like farmland, kind of in that whole like northern Peace country. And there was a huge piece of like freshly tilled land, like big pasture, like big field that was just freshly tilled down in brown dirt, just north of the settlement. So I think as that fire came south, it kind of, I'm kind of doing stuff with my hands, so people who are watching it'll see, but to those who are listening, think of it like a rock or a wave hitting a rock. That fire hit and then it kind of split around. You had the spot fires and the embers coming down too, but a lot of it was just trees on fire on the outskirts. So we did the sprinkler protection on a lot of the homes, on the critical infrastructure. And then I know we were tasked. So our unit, we were told, okay, park by the store on the highway, watch for this trigger point. If the fire gets to X point, like pretty much if this thing's going to overrun us, you guys are the lookouts. You sound the alarm. And if it gets to this point, we got to get out of here. Like there's nothing we can do, and we have to evacuate the area and go down to Keg River. And then we're also asked to ensure nobody drives into the community. And we had trucks. We had 2 trucks specifically that blew by us. And I know we were getting yelled at, like, well, make sure those trucks don't come in here. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like jump in front of them? Like the one guy was actually helping us out during the day with going around picking up animals and stray dogs or just even pets from the different properties, so that way at least all the pets were picked up. Quiet you. All the pets were picked up from the different houses and stuff of that nature. So he's like, I'm just going in real quick. So he went in, grabbed whatever he needed, and then he left. Another guy that blew by us actually went. He cut the fencing on his. He had bison, I believe, or horses. I think bison. He just blew by, snipped the wire, so that way they could run away from the fire. So anyway, we're sitting there, and we could hear on the radio some of the crews were starting to, attack the fire. So we had engines and tenders. We had tenders running water back and forth, and we had engines basically putting out fire as it was coming onto some of these properties. Luckily, nighttime we weren't getting that super like crazy active fire behavior. And then at one point, I don't know when the call was made. I remember it was around 4 a.m. because I know I was sitting there, and whatchamacallit? We were sitting there waiting, and I remember I sent an email out. I think I made a phone call too. I think I did phone my wife and kind of give her a bit of a heads up. And so we were sitting there and kind of waiting. It's like, hey, we want to do something, but at the same time too, everybody's got a job to do, and you kind of do your task. So we did that until we were told, okay, well, actually, we can utilize you guys over here. So I remember it was 4 in the morning. Then we started actually like getting on active fire attack. So we went back through the community. We went up. I remember going across this little single lane bridge. It was like this little wooden bridge, and that was a concern because we didn't want to get cut off on this property. I remember watching, the fires burning through, and we're kind of like letting it burn up as much of, as close to these properties as possible, because just to eliminate that fuel. But we didn't want it to like burn down houses. So that was our main priority. So then it was coming, and we let it burn quite a bit, and we're like, okay, well, let's knock this thing down. So we started knocking down, the fire, putting it out, and then we were just kind of hopping from one property to the next to the next. So this was kind of in the middle of the settlement. And then afterwards, I remember we were working on the west side. So there's like a row of homes on the west side that we were just kind of like hopscotching from. And like that radio chatter was just going off. But, we were just like, okay, we go over here. I remember we went to this one home, High Level had their engine. They were basically working on keeping the fire off this house. I remember Jenna was like, she was running the pump and she had a hand line keeping the fire from like burning up to the truck. We were assisting, I forget who we were assisting, but basically the power line, like there was a power pole, and we were keeping that fire from burning up to a power pole. And then we were getting refilled from tenders, and I think, one from down in like Rocky View County. Like there was just, we had people from all over the place. But I'll tell you the one thing, and it's a true testament to, the firefighting training we have. Everybody fit in so well. Like, because everybody 1001 trained, we trained to the same fire standard, all that. It wasn't a matter of like, well, I don't know how you guys do things. Everybody kind of knew what they had to do. Everybody had their job to do, and everybody kind of filled that role. So, it ran pretty smooth there. Now, at that point, I remember, like I said, putting out fires, and it was cold. Like, I mean, this was like end of May, but because of the smoke cover and just like the wind was crazy. I had my bunker coat on. Like I had we brought our structural gear with us. We never ended up using it, but they tell, sometimes it's handy to have, but typically on these events, you're not going to be going in and fighting a structure fire. But I digress. It was nice to have my coat because that's what kept me warm, because it was actually pretty chilly that night. So, and then the smoke, I'm glad we had like the P100 respirators, and we had like the half mask respirator, because like even that you could just smell, and like you just taste that smoke, because you were just getting blasted with it. Like there was so much smoke in the air. Now I'll tell you this, like with the filters on, you're like, hey, well, I still smell and taste the smoke. But then as soon as you take it off, you're like, holy crap, it's even way worse. So like, I couldn't imagine working without it, because I seen like how bad it was even with it. But I mean, running like a self-contained breathing apparatus would have been impractical at that point, and so we just kept working the way we were. Remember we got to one point, I thought this house was completely engulfed in fire, because from my vantage point as we were driving up to it, it looked like you just see everything was on fire. Now, afterwards, after we did a bit of work and I came back to this house, all the siding was melted, and like the glass was cracked a little bit just from the heat. But the house, actually, the crews that were there knocking down the fire in that area, they were able to get it under control to the point where it didn't burn that house down. But the siding was definitely messed up. And I remember down this road, because there was like that one house, there was like a little pond. There was that house, and that was the one that I thought was on fire. And then you would go down the road, there was like 2 or 3 different houses down that way. And same thing there, like, it was starting to get a little bit of daylight, because I think we were hitting about the 7, 8 in the morning mark there. So like, it was a weird night, like time frame wise. And we'd all been up the day before. We'd all worked through the night. Very, 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 very minimal sleep is what we got. So we, and typically up when you're that far north in summertime, days are longer. Wintertime days are considerably shorter. But usually around that time of the year, 5:30, 6 in the morning, you're already starting to see daylight. And it didn't start getting bright out until about, I would say, 8 o'clock in the morning. 7:30, 8 o'clock is when we first started seeing some adequate light, because the sun was actually getting to a point where it was actually helping. But because the smoke was so thick, and it basically blotted out the sun. And it never really did get daylight the whole time we were there. So, yeah, we were continuing to work through this. Keep in mind too, we couldn't get any relief until that fire had kind of burned through. So we were doing what we could. So yeah, we went down. I remember we were fighting fire in this. There's this one little property there. I remember looking in the back, and we had crews, and I remember one guy's like, because we were basically specifically told, don't go into the bush. We're not going into the trees. We're going to protect it in the yard. Put out the spot fires in the yard, but don't fight. You're not going into the bush to fight the tree fire. A, because dangerous, given the conditions, and B, we want that fuel to get consumed based on all the situation with the wildfire burning through the area. But there's one, I remember we were, putting out the spot fires, and I'm looking, and I'm like, okay, they got their home, and they had this brand new F-350 parked in front of this detached single car garage, and then inside the single car garage they had a side by side. And then I was looking out back, and they had this wooden lean-to shed looking thing. So then it was a lot of deciduous trees, but there was the odd conifer in there, and conifers are anytime that fire had creeped up to a conifer, it just lit up. Those things were torching really bad. I remember the one guy I think he was from Beaver Lodge. He's like, I'm not going in there. That tree there's a widowmaker. So I'm looking at it. I'm like, if this fire creeps through this bush and it lights that tree on fire, it's going to fall on top of this wooden shed. It's going to take out that single car garage. It's going to light up. This person's going to lose a whole bunch of stuff. So I looked at it, and I'm looking, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, that looks pretty sketchy. And I'm like, we need to knock this fire out before it gets to that tree. So I was like, honestly, I'm like, give me the line, I'll go in. So I remember going in and stopping it from getting to that one spruce tree. And I think that action there, even though I had to go into the bush a little ways, that action there saved a bunch of property. And you kind of get into that whole thing of you risk a little, save a little. You risk a lot to save a lot. So I was like, okay, well, I think I can do this safely, and clearly I did. So that's what we did there. And then fire just kept burning around that property. We just kept playing hopscotch. So, and then at that point you can tell people were getting fatigued and tired. People were starting to get a little lapsadaisical, not lapsadaisical, but starting to make errors in judgment. And or one instance, one guy came up to me. He's like, "Hey, man, there's a shed on this property, and there's a whole bunch of saddles and Western tack in there." And he's like, "We need to get this out. This stuff's valuable." I said, "Okay." And at this point, people were kind of getting annoyed with this certain person, because they were I could tell, I think the fatigue and the stress was getting to them, because they were kind of jumping around all over the place. So then I'm like, I told my crew member, don't worry, I'll go give him a hand. I'll go deal with this. He said, you guys just keep doing what you're doing here. Walked over, and we're pulling saddles out of the shed. But literally, I'm watching, and the back end of the shed is on fire. There's literally fire burning up the back side of the shed as we're pulling saddles and freaking reins and stuff out of the shed. And so we're pulling it out, whipping it out, pulling what we could, getting it to safety. And then at one point, he was going in to grab something else. I'm like, okay, that's it. We're grabbing one little bit, we're grabbing this, and we're done. Because I'm watching this fire, it was consuming this whole shed. It was damn near half on fire at that point. So we did that. And then, well, we don't want it to get damaged or anything by the rain, so we took it and we put it on their front deck. We tarped it in. One thing I didn't realize, and I learned after the fact, is oil. There's saddle oil. They use oil to keep everything kind of looking new and protected. Yeah, oil retains heat. It's flammable. Luckily, we were there on that property, kind of just, watching it to ensure that all the spot fires were out as the fire was kind of burning around it. As we're sitting there, my driver operator was like, "Hey, what's going on over there? Is that smoke I see?" And then we went and we pulled the tarp off, and yeah, there was a rag that had saddle oil on it that had actually started combusting. It actually started on fire. Took it out, we doused everything down. And, I'm glad we were there, because that would have been a terrible way to lose a home, especially, something that's worth something that's valuable. But also to in the grand scheme of things, we protect the homes because that's where the majority of a person's stuff is. But we'll do what we can to protect everything. Anyway. So yeah, I remember then I had a face-to-face with that individual, and I basically told him straight. And I mean, I was pissed off. I was mad. I mean, tired, cranky, angry, need a Snickers, that sort of thing. So I was like, "Okay, well," and I was ready to go up to this guy and just lay into him like, I wanted to tell him, like, "You mother." I'm trying to keep this one a little bit more on the PG side, so that way more people can listen to the story. But anyway, I was ready to curse him out, and I'm like, "You know what?" I took a deep breath. I said, "Okay, listen," I said, I'm not trying to be a dick here. I said, "But this is what happened." I said, "The decision that you made, this could have cost us a house." And I said, "I get it. I get what you're trying to do, and we're trying to save everything we can." But I said, we're fatigued. We're stretched thin. We can only save what we can save. I mean, well, if we could save everything, cool. But I mean, given the resources we have and the condition everyone's in, and just, the level of energy and, manpower we had at that point in time, it just wasn't quite enough. So I had to really communicate to this person that, look, I get it. We want to do everything in our power, but we can't do everything, especially, like I said, with the condition and the shape and how tired and stressed and the amount of smoke we were huffing in at that point. I'm like, we can't do everything. I said, decisions like this can lead to bad outcomes, people getting seriously hurt, and then actually like us going backwards and losing more valuable assets. Once again, if you ask that homeowner, what would you have rather had, your house or the saddles, they probably would have said their house and all their belongings. I said, I don't want to be a dick, but go take 5 minutes. I said, you're starting to run around in circles, and at the same time too, this person was trying to be like, well, we need to get this piece of equipment in here set up. We would get set up. No, actually, scratch that. We're going to move you over here. So there was a lot of that, like just making poor decisions based on fatigue. And honestly, unless you've worked in that industry, like I said, for me, I worked years and years of chasing rigs, running power tongs, and anyone who understands what that is, I mean, you're literally living in your truck, working and trying to get as many jobs in as possible. So you're essentially living fatigued all the time. Wasn't right, but you spent a lot of time on the road, and sleep was a luxury. So I got used to being able to perform with very little sleep. Not everybody has that opportunity or that luxury. So, and then we just kind of kept working, putting out spots and whatever. And then I want to say it was about 10:30 in the morning when finally reinforcements arrived from up in high level. Because it got to a point where, the fire behavior had calmed down, especially because we were socked in with cloud cover. So it was just, like I said, we kept knocking down fire in, alongside the properties as the fire kind of burned around the community. So by the time we left, it had, like, it was kind of burning to the south side of Paddle. So then, what the heck was there? Yeah, so we kind of regrouped at the store there. The store obviously was closed because there was nobody around. And I think when our reinforcements showed up, they brought food, which was nice because we had some stuff, but it was kind of nice to eat breakfast or lunch or whatever Oh, we ate breakfast. That's what it was. They brought breakfast, so we kind of snacked on that. And I just wanted a coffee. There's no coffee to be had. Speaking of coffee, yeah, there was no coffee to be had, so I was hoping, but energy drink I think did it in the meantime. So reinforcements came in. We kind of did handover, and then our whole unit. So everybody was part of that division. All our task forces. We all regrouped at the community center. I think at one point they're like, "Well, you guys will stick around for lunch, and then you guys can motor back to high level." And I know we had the conversation because everybody we had kind of snacked a little bit, and we're like, I think we kind of chatted. It was a thing of, do we really want to stick around for lunch? I just want to go to bed. I'll worry about eating later. So I think the group consensus was, yeah, we're not going to stick around for lunch. We're just going to hit the road a little bit earlier. So yeah, we did a debrief, a mini one. We kind of talked about things a little bit, and then made that decision to not stick around till noon to leave. And then also the question was asked, okay, well, is everyone fit to drive? So we kind of went around and figured out who was the most rested, I guess, who was able to drive. So we kind of kept an eye on each other. I remember driving north, and I think I nodded off at one point, but I remember driving north because the trees. One thing I learned while being there, when a wildfire burns through with that intensity, trees almost get frozen in place, and it's odd to see because you think heat's not going to freeze anything, but I guess it's a thing. I guess it's a thing where the heat is so intense it actually crystallizes some of the organic material inside of the tree. So as the wind is pushing, so you've got wind generated by that fire, and it's going to be pushing towards or pushing away from where the fire is. Well, it depends on, wind will be pushing away. Sometimes it pulls in, depending on the chimney effect. But anyway, whichever way the wind is blowing, the trees are going to lean in that direction. And then as that fire burns through, you have all these trees that have this perpetual lean to them because they were kind of burn frozen in place, if that's a thing. So I found that was pretty neat. As we were traveling north, we, seen those trees, and then I'm looking at the houses that we did the sprinkler protection on earlier that day. Because obviously, the ones we were doing our bump and goes around, the ones that we were actively doing firefighting on, we were able to manage to protect in the community. The critical infrastructure stayed standing, but what I was concerned with was, hey, the homes that we did sprinkler protection on to the north. And you're driving by, and it's okay, cool, that one's still there. Damn, that one's not there. That one's there. That one's not. Then we hit the Praise the Lord house, and anyone who's traveled that highway will know it. And those that don't, actually, you can, even if you did a Google image search of or satellite image of Paddle, you would see the Praise the Lord house. The roofing material is arranged to say, it says Praise the Lord. And that one stayed standing, which I felt was pretty iconic. Especially for the people of that community, to that homeowner anyway. But anyone who's traveled that highway, everybody has their different beliefs. And, I don't think it's fair to judge anyone based on what they believe, what they don't. Myself's a Christian as well, but I think it's a testament to that. Somebody's like, hey, my faith helped at that point in time. So I found it was pretty iconic that the Praise of the Lord, oh man, I'm losing my talk here. Praise the Lord house was still standing at the end of this. And then unfortunately, the one that we did that pump swap on, the furthest north, that one was gone as well. Now, I guess before I continue on, I want to sidestep a little bit and talk about, there's a lot of things that get said on social media. You read the comment sections you go into, and it's like, well, these firefighters, they don't care. It's not theirs. They don't own a bolt in it, and they'll just leave it abandoned. They don't care. And I've seen so much stuff, especially in the last couple of years here with, a lot of people talking about conspiracies and, thinking that, government control, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'll say this right now. You can dislike the government and policies and whatever else you want, but and have distrust. But I guarantee you, any firefighter that's on the line cares. We feel it when we don't succeed, when the outcome isn't positive. We feel that. We're not there to let things burn. We're not there to let things go by the wayside. We're not there to abandon unless it is absolutely unsafe for us to be there. Because I'm not going to lose my life over a inanimate structure or piece of property. But I also know too that this means something to people and their livelihood. Their life is there. This is their life. Now, are they still alive? Absolutely. But it still affects things massively. So we truly do care about that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to kind of come on the record and say that for sure. Interesting. Like I said, doing this podcast, way different. I mean, I'm impressed that I've talked for as long as I have, and I still have more to say. I mean, there's been a few times where either something's distracted me or I get lost in thought, and that's the thing. It's because I'm trying to remember and trying to pull back to my feelings and trying to. And I don't know, on the video if it's going to convey the look in my face. I don't know if it's there or not. This was a whole exercise in, I don't know, try to get it out there and try to make sense of things. And just, going through that experience. So anyway, I'll finish the remainder of that day, and then I'll kind of close things off. So yeah, we drove back to High Level. I remember passing all those homes, and then I think I nodded off a little bit. I remember we passed by like truck and trailer loaded with heavy equipment. Like there was tons of equipment being mobilized to that area. We made it back to High Level. We went to the fire hall and we did a debrief with the incident commander there and the fire chief in High Level. And yeah, he said like the conditions rapidly changed. They had crews over in the Creed area, Paddle Prairie, and they actually had to put back up some of the stuff we took down the day before because of just the way the fire behavior had changed on that wildfire. So yeah, we did a debrief, and I think there was kind of an initial assessment as to what had been affected or not. And at that point, the rumor mill had already started because, I mean, I was on Facebook and I think I was looking at stuff, and there was people that were part of the community that were basically going online saying that everything had been gone. Like basically, the community had been abandoned. Nobody was there to help them. And I mean, if you don't know any different, obviously that would be the perception of it. Remember, there was one gentleman from the community, Glenn. He took photographs of like us. Remember, there's one photograph, and actually was used on newscasts and news articles and whatever, of us standing in front of the community center. So before we left Paddle, there was a photograph of the ones that worked through the night that we took in front of their community plex, and it was kind of a testament to this is who was here. I remember Glenn shared that out. He said, no, these are the brave individuals that stayed through the night to ensure that we had a home to come back to. So, some of that stuff had, kind of come out through the wash. It's like, at least there was a positive spin on it. And if anybody asks, like, because I know sometimes too, social media can become I don't want to say a thorn in the side of some emergency measures, or I guess some people just don't understand it. And I think, there's positive and negative. And obviously, if people are releasing information out of context, or they're just releasing stuff without prior notifications happening, and things that just aren't tactful or tasteful in any way, shape, or form, that's definitely an issue. That's definitely a problem. But I think also on the flip side of when you're trying to tell a story, it allows you the ability to tell that story, and that's what I'd like to see more of in the future. And I think we've seen it back then, and then we started seeing it here with Jasper as well. That there was a lot of stuff being released prematurely, but then I found that the Parks Canada came up with a lot of good stuff that they were releasing on their page to try and basically be like, here's the information, here's the official information, so that way people aren't speculating. Because if the quicker and the more accurate you can get that information out to the people, the calmer they are, the more relieved they are, the more you can start that closure process. Unfortunately, even if you have suffered loss. So anyway, did our debrief. I remember going back and falling asleep. I can't remember if I showered first. Maybe I did. I think maybe I did. I talked to my chief, talked to my wife. Then I had to sleep. I was basically like, I'm done. I can't even keep my eyes open anymore. Because I think by the time I got back to my room, it was like 4 p.m. Because we didn't leave. I don't think we ended up leaving Paddle till like noon. Anyway, we didn't stick around for lunch, but I don't think we. By the time we got back and got settled in and whatever, I don't think I fell asleep till like 3:30, 4 o'clock. So woke up, had some supper, showered, maybe showered again. I'll tell you this right now. For the next 3 to 4 days, every time I sweat, and even when I showered, it smelled like campfire. There was so much smoke. I was surrounded by so much smoke on that it basically it permeated into my pores for that long period of time. So it was quite intense. And then after that, fire behavior obviously got crazy. We were at the end of our deployment anyway, and talked to our fire chief. He's like, "Well, no, you guys are out of there." And I don't think we had anyone else to send up. I think might have been the issue. I can't remember. We ended up heading home on the Thursday. Now, I inquired to basically be like, can I get to Rainbow Lake? Because at this point, there was a fire that had started up north as well. I think there was another fire that kind of kicked off due to the extreme behavior up around the access road to Zama. So I remember talking to one of the command staff, and I'm like, is there any way I can get to Rainbow Lake? And he's like, well, I don't think so. He's like, all the highways, we've got them all shut down. I don't think they're letting anybody through. And I guess realistically, if I really, really would have pushed on it, I'm sure I could have got to Rainbow Lake. But I was like, you know what, honestly, I phoned my foreman. I'm like, you guys able to cover the spread for now? Because, things weren't crazy, crazy busy. He's like, no, we can handle it. He's like, head home, and he's like, you can make it up here, like, come back whenever the highways open up. Okay. So I packed up my stuff and went back home. So, and then I guess making it home was another thing too. I remember the kids. They wrote little notes for me, and I still got them hanging up my fire locker. And my youngest was pretty young at the time. It was basically like, "You did good. You saved town. Glad you're not dead," or something to that effect. But all 3 kids, they wrote something, they typed it out, and then they drew little pictures. And they presented this stuff to me, and then they gave me like this hero cookie. they baked me a big cookie for when I got home. So I had a nice homecoming to that. And that's actually kind of even where Fire Steve kind of came from, because I think that was in one of the things that I think Vic wrote for me or something like that. It's like, you did good, Fire Steve, or I can't remember. There was Fire Steve was mentioned at that point. So I mean, it was a thing even before this whole thing was a thing. I'm not going to get into it fully on this podcast, but 2019 was definitely a trying year. There was a lot of stuff I went through, and even before the Chuckegg, lost my grandma earlier the month before. And I know I fully hadn't processed that. And then the Chuckegg fire happened, and the battle at Paddle happened. And just like I said, seeing that in the moment, you're experiencing all this chaos. So much stuff is going on around you. But you don't really process it because you have a job to do. You have a job to do, you're going to do your thing. So you kind of brush it off. And then, I was home for a few days, and highways opened up, went back to work, and just kind of got back in that groove of things. And in typical guy fashion, didn't deal with things in the best way. Well, probably not in the best way, but just kind of shelved it. And that's the whole reason why I wanted to come on and talk about this here tonight, because I know there's people that were on that fire in Jasper. And I mean, and even too, like I said, you go back to people that experienced Slave Lake and experienced Fort Mac, I assure you, and I can assume and almost guess that a lot of the feelings are the same. And even more so in some of those instances, because fortunately in our case, I feel like we did, things worked in our favor, and we were able to save a substantial amount. Other communities weren't so lucky. And I think it just, as our training gets better, our, methods and tactics and just the equipment we use gets better, it allows us to do a better job. Would we have had that same outcome if it was all forest all the way up to that community, up to Paddle Prairie? I don't think so. That pasture, that fuel break, I think saved our ass there. That's just my own personal opinion. And I'll be completely honest, like everything here that I've said tonight is my own personal interpretation and opinion. There might be things where I'm mixing up some of the facts of it, because this is 5 years ago, and keep in mind that when things like this happen, it is a lot. It's pretty heavy. Now, one thing I found that was super important. So obviously 2019 came, went. 2020, we dealt with COVID, lockdowns, more mental health stuff came into the fold. Since I was working up in Rainbow Lake, I remember on the 1 year anniversary of Paddle, I took a drive. I was on shift. I took a drive. I left Rainbow. I think it was like a 2.5 hour drive. 2.5. Yeah, basically it was an hour and a half from Rainbow to High Level, and then probably another hour down towards Paddle. And I remember I went there. I was like, I want to be here on the 1 year anniversary. There was no event. There was nothing scheduled. There was nothing planned. I just went for a drive. Took a picture in front of their sign, which is over by the store. Took a drive through the community. Like, I didn't go through, I didn't drive down every road we were on, but I kind of just drove through the main community, and there were kids playing. There's people mowing their lawns, doing their thing. Obviously, like I said, that wasn't super active because we were dealing with the COVID stuff. But it was interesting to see that things were there. There was a community still there. I remember I was going to stop in at the store too, but they were just closing up. So I remember I talked to the one lady that was working there. She was just on her way out. I'm like, I was here a year ago. It was kind of like, oh, okay. And that wasn't a huge interaction. Anyway, let's fast forward to 2022. Because I did, like I said, was there on the 1 year anniversary. I can't remember if I went back for the 2 year. I don't think I did. I don't think I went back in 2021. But we'll fast forward to 2022. So at this point, I left Rainbow Lake in late or early 2022. So like January was the last month I worked in Rainbow Lake of 2022. I started my new work in Red Earth Creek. So took an operating job there. So I was no longer up in the north. Now I'd been out there. So in September, Paddle Prairie put out an invitation to any fire department that was there to basically be like, hey, we're doing a banquet. We're doing a community event, and we'd love for any firefighters that were there to make the trip. I was on shift, and it was actually also at the same time we had our firefighter banquet in Lac La Biche, and I was like, well, I'm on shift, so I won't be making it to that. Now I kind of screwed up too because I was looking at it like as I punched it in, I'm like, well, I'm in Red Earth, I'm closer to Paddle than I was from home. But when I typed it in, of course, on my Apple Maps, it punches it in as the crow flies. I'm like, oh, it's only 200 kilometers away. I'm like, 2 hours? I'm like, that's easy peasy. I'll do that. It was actually a 3-hour drive. Oops. Because then when I started driving, I'm like, man, this is feeling longer than what it should be. And I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, no. I did the calculations wrong. Either way, I brought my fire uniform up to work. I talked to my foreman. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I get my work done? And I can go to this thing. He's like, yep, absolutely. So yeah, I checked all my wells, did my run for the day, and then hopped in the truck and drove up to Paddle. And this was like mid-September of 2022. And made up there, and they were having like they did a presentation, there was a banquet, like there was meals and stuff like that. And, listening to some of the speakers talk. And it's something that they wanted to do for their community after the events of 2019. And unfortunately, COVID and then of course the impacts of COVID on the community didn't help either. So this was the first time they were able to gather as a community since the fires of 2019. I'll tell you this, like, it's giving me goosebumps right now. I didn't realize that closure. Oftentimes we will respond to an incident and that's it. You see them. I mean, there's many cases too. I mean, whether you respond to a motor vehicle accident and it's like, okay, well, you pick them up, send them in an ambulance, send them on stars, air ambulance, whatever, and you never hear an update. Did they live? Did they not? What happened? And we don't always get that closure, but when we do, it does help considerably. More than you would know. So going to that banquet was huge because I was actually able to interact with members of the community. And even I remember talking to some of the council members and stuff like that, and obviously the photo ops and everything. Because I think there was 4 or 5 firefighters total. I think there was two firefighters that made it from high level. I was the only one from Lac La Biche, and then they had then Gerald from Hayduck made it up as well. So there was a few of us that made it up. And I remember, I was there. We did the meal, did some photos, and then I remember somebody come up to me like, "Hey, do you mind taking a picture with this family here?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely." They're like, "Yeah, they lost their home," and it's like shit, but they're still there, and they rebuilt, and it felt really good to just be there. And I don't think, honestly, I didn't leave Paddle till probably 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I remember they were asking me like, well, like, well, how far do you got to drive? I'm like, I got like a 3-hour drive. They're like, 3 hours? Holy man, you're gonna be tired. I'm like, honestly, this is important. It was, and I felt like you said it was important for the community members to be like, oh, here's somebody who was here that night. But it was important for me too. And it was nice, talking to some people about, they were like, just emergency preparedness stuff, and they're like, yeah, like, we talked a lot about this back then, but now it's kind of fallen by the wayside. And I think it's important to open up these conversations of what communities can do for emergency preparedness and stuff of this, because we don't know when these events are going to happen. We don't know where a fire is going to start and how intense it's going to be. But the fact that I was able to sit and have a meal and visit and share a laugh, share a cry was huge. And to any of the first responders that were at Jasper or any of these other ones, like, just going back to these communities afterwards, once some things have come back and rebuilt, it helps. It helps to be there through that process. I don't know how else to put that. And it doesn't pull everything away. Because like I said, I go back to, like I said, seeing the images out of Jasper of everything being on fire brought me right back to myself being there that day, that night, that morning in Paddle Prairie. And I guarantee you, any firefighters that were in Fort McMurray seeing the images are seeing the same thing. Anybody who was in Slave Lake seeing the same thing, feeling the same thing. So I think that's all I have to talk on that. I think that it's very important to reach out and talk about these things, and especially, like I said, if you're feeling a certain way and you're feeling like maybe we didn't do enough, you did everything that you absolutely could. You did everything in your power to try and bring the situation under control. And sometimes too, things are so chaotic and some things are so intense that it doesn't feel like we're having an impact. But I mean, every little thing we do is helping. But when it's that severe, it doesn't seem like it's really doing a whole lot. And the biggest thing is that everybody, went home safe at the end of the day. It's the most important thing. And I know that's one thing I'll be continuing on, is just, working on my own, breaking things down from that point in time. Sometimes talking about things is hard. It's difficult. It's difficult to be like, hey, I'm not okay, or I need to talk it out, or I don't feel right. So definitely going to be, working on that, and I encourage anybody else to do that as well. But I guess on that note, that's the story of Paddle Prairie, the Battle at Paddle, from the Chuckegg in 2019. Feels good to kind of talk it all out, especially too, going from before it started right till the closure aspect of it. My coffee cup here. So yeah, hopefully everybody enjoyed the story, and I'm looking forward to hearing other stories. If people want to share, open up that conversation, helping each other out, I think would be greatly beneficial. And I want to continue to do more of it. But as always, this was some more blazing banter with Fire Steve, obviously with just myself, and more of a blazing story, burning story. I don't know. I'm kind of spitballing here. I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't know if I need to have a cry or what. I don't know. But I appreciate everybody listening. I didn't think I was going to talk on this for 2 hours, but I guess it was, that's the story I needed to tell. I didn't realize, when I first started talking, I'm like, this will be about an hour. And we really don't know. Once we start getting it out there and start talking about things, and we realize that, yeah, it's not just a simple, short conversation. Especially when you're working through all the things that you experienced and you went through, and remembering the images in your brain. But yeah, this was definitely a good one and interesting. I can talk, but I also feel awkward talking to myself for this period of time. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Simple plugs here. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, the video feeds on YouTube. You can see my pretty lights in the background here and my smiling face. Any engagement, greatly appreciated. You can also find me, Fire Steve, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. YouTube's where the podcast is as well. And Facebook as well. So appreciate all the support, everybody. Hopefully this reaches the people it needs to reach. And if anybody needs to reach out, and would love to have some more in-depth conversations on it, or if this impacted you in a positive way, or if it helped, or something to that effect. I'd love to hear about it. I like to get some follow-up, because once again, it goes back to that whole closure aspect. If listening to a shared experience helps bring some closure, or helps brings a little bit of solace to you, then, even if it's one person, then I feel I've accomplished what I've set out to accomplish. But as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, night, morning, depending on what time you're tuning in from. And stay safe out there, everybody. Fire Steve out.